Hi, everyone, and thanks for being with me on the Tony Tompkins Show on this Tuesday afternoon. And I'm excited to know that I've actually been able to connect with YouTube, which is the first time for ages. But that's because, obviously, around some technical issues, I'm rather inept. So, but however, I am on Facebook at the moment. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you, and also for you to offer your suggestions, questions, and to become involved in the conversation here on the Tony Tonkin channel. So, and Jenny says, thanks, spot on time. I do my best, Jen. I try to be as relevant as I can whenever I can. And this, Jen, I am talking a little bit about some of the Trump issues today. But I'm going to start actually by talking about some other issues that are more local, and then towards the end of the time we're spending together, I would be talking about some of the more interesting Trump shit that's happening right now and how that impacts all of us. PWR, good to see you as well as always. So join in, have a conversation with us. What I do enjoy mostly is sometimes the conversations that you have amongst yourselves about the things that you choose to discuss. I really do appreciate that, and I know that that is a strong and important element of these communications and these conversations on YouTube in particular. Haven't necessarily noticed all that much happening on Facebook simply because I haven't been there. But I'm going to talk initially. Well, one of the things I am going to do later on today, which is I'm going to put out a bit of a video on One Nation, and particularly the speech that Pauline Hanson gave on Sunday in relation to the Australia First, whatever it is, campaign that was run, and some of the obscure, strange and bizarre things that Pauline talks about. And also we'll be discussing some other statistics that have come out that indicates that those people that are voting now for One Nation are not necessarily elder people. They're Generation X or Generation Z, one of the alphabets. But they're, and I'm sure someone will correct me on whichever one they are, but how they are influenced. So they're people around the age of 40, and how they're impacted by the standard of living at the moment, and particularly affordability around housing, and how they see themselves as different from those people who, or they see themselves as different from their parents, I guess. That's basically what it amounts to, and the struggles they have taken. And they're an important group that we need to be mindful of. And it was rather a relief, I guess, to find that it wasn't just the older people, my own generation, who were shifting from the Liberal Party through to One Nation, but it's also this other group of disinfected younger people who have got issues with the way the world is being shaped, and particularly the way the Australian government is operating in relation to affordability. So we'll be discussing that in a later video, so I'm just preempting all of that. That'll be a fun video to do, I think. But I want to start with an issue which has concerned me. Now, this issue came about because today I received a phone call from a woman I worked with some years ago now. Her name's Brooke. Don't mind mentioning her name. Don't think she'd mind either. And she had a child that was removed, or a few children, 4 children I think they were in total, that were removed from her for the child protection system. And I don't normally engage in those conversations because I retired a couple of years ago from doing that sort of work. But I have been doing that work for about two decades, I guess. It reminded me, though, of the importance of state involvement in the removal of children, and how since I haven't been as involved in that as I should, or I could have been, it did remind me of the importance to advocate for families whose children have been taken from them by the state. And I'm making this particular comment because on my Facebook page there are many people that have engaged with me over the years in relation to this particular issue, and it's an important one. And I want to conflate this with another issue which came out in the news on the ABC today, and that was survivors of forced adoption, and that is still an issue that tends to get swept under the carpet. People don't seem to recognise the importance, in fact, of what happened during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, up to 1975, I believe, where people, women had their children removed from them simply because they were unmarried. And as a social worker, I've often felt very guilty, in fact, that it was my profession who participated greatly in the removal of these children. And it's an embarrassment to know that an organisation that's supposed to be focusing on social justice issues could have actually done something as horrific as forcing women to lose their children for no other reason apart from the fact that they may not have had a partner. Not because they're in a DV relationship, which is often the case now in terms of state removals, or because they even had a mental well-being issue, which is still an issue within the state system at the moment, but simply because they were unmarried. And it was an embarrassment for the families and for everybody else. So social workers decided to step in along with the approval of the government in order to have these children removed from their terrible, terrible parents. So in this particular article, it says survivors of forced adoption in South Australia call for greater recognition, and so it should be. And so in short, it is basically survivors of historical forced adoption practices are calling for South Australia to establish a state-based redress scheme. Tasmania recently became the second state after Victoria to announce such an initiative. The SA government says it remains committed to supporting those affected, but declined to say whether it will establish a redress scheme in the future. Now, I would like you to comment to me on the comment section about how you think this should be worked, whether or not you think a redress scheme should be given to these women who have had their children removed at birth. And I just want to describe this a little bit better as to what this is like for these women. Because I've worked in the child protection system for so many years, I came upon many women who have been have given birth to a child. The department has stepped in as the child literally is being born. And there's one woman I remember who was talking about the fact that she was still in stirrups where the department walked in and removed her children. The doctor hadn't even signed her up, but they were there and they removed the children. And she's described what that meant to her. Now, to some of you, this may not be a world-shattering event, but I am telling you that these things happen every day. And this instance about forced removals is an issue which has an impact today, because for me, as someone that's worked in this area, this is still continuing. What we're seeing now, and people asking for a redress around all of this stuff, is still happening. Yet we turned a blind eye to it because I'm telling you now, and this really irritates me, is that issues around children and the well-being of children seems to be so far down the care ladder that it surprises me immensely that people care so little about the well-being of children. So I'm just going to read a little bit more of this article to you. So Jo Forrest was 18 years. She was 18 years old when she fell pregnant in Adelaide in 1964. I had to be hidden away from people. Clearly, it was an embarrassment. Mum and Dad never actually called me a bad girl, but there was always this shame. So I was an outcast. More than 60 years on, the now 80-year-old remembers her father taking her to the Queen Victoria Maternity Hospital. And then, of course, you get left there and you're young. You never experienced anything like this. I was physically held down with a pillow over my head and had no idea whether I gave birth to a baby girl or baby boy. So while she was delivering this child, she had a pillow put over her head so she could not see the child. And I need you all to consider how embarrassing, how absolutely embarrassing is that. Miss Forrest said she was injected with an anti-lactation injection with a drug shortly after birth, which has since been connected to gynecological cancer. Unfortunately, I got put into a room with mothers and babies because they'd run out of room on their wards for the bad girls. It was horrendous. I've just given birth. I don't know where my baby is. I don't even know what my baby is. It will be years until she found out she gave birth to a baby boy. Miss Forrest is one of thousands of women whose babies were taken in Australia's forced adoption era, when young and unwed mothers were routinely shamed and coerced into surrendering their children. Thanks, James, for your $5, buddy. I really do appreciate it. At the moment, it's just rotating around on my studio, but I'm assuming it's still going through to everybody. It is estimated as many as 250. Now, just take this into account. It's estimated that as many as 250,000 Australians were affected by the practices, with most adoptions occurring between 1950 and 1975. There was a talk of adoption, that your baby may need to be adopted, but he didn't make that decision. And one of the reasons why this was so prevalent back in the 50s to the 70s was that there were so many people wanting to adopt a child. So it seemed appropriate that they should target women who were without a partner, who just didn't fit into society, and who therefore should have their children removed, to fill this gap where parents, where people wanted to be parents, weren't able to. Adoption was hard to come by, but this was a way by which they could easily have access to children. So, age 17 years old, her baby was forced removed at birth at her Perth hospital. This is another woman in 1965. The minute she was born, they cut the cord immediately and took her out. I was left with the doctor who sexually assaulted me after that. How cruel does this get? Miss McCulloch described her treatment by medical staff as inhumane. I don't remember a whole lot in there, and yet everyone that knows me knows I've got a really, really good memory. I believe I probably was drugged. More than 2 decades later, she received contact from her daughter Anne through the Child Welfare Department. She saw Anne's face for the first time when she was sent a photograph from her wedding day, with the pair eventually meeting in person in 1989. We see each other every 3 months. We made a vow to do that because if you're apart for too long, you grow apart. And this is her and her daughter. So last year, Victoria became the first state to launch a redress scheme offering a one-off payment, and it's hardly enough for the suffering caused by having these children removed from these parents. Not just for the parent, but also for the children. Access to counselling and psychological support, and an individual apology process to women who were separated from their infants at birth. In October, the Tasmanian government announced a plan to do the same. The initiative was recommended from a national 2012 Senate inquiry. She said that while compensation could never erase her pain, she wanted to see the South Australian government provide greater recognition of the lifelong consequences of past practice on mothers and adoptees. It doesn't matter what sort of monetary you could put on losing your child. Nothing will ever cover that. But maybe, just some validation of what really happened, and sorry. And I think that's the point. The point is we need to be mindful not of those things that have happened to these women and their children, who were often told that they didn't have somebody else, that they didn't have a parent, that somehow their parent had either died or disappeared, or they were disowned, or the parent didn't want them. All those particular reasons were given. And I think that it's really sad that we haven't up until this time. So it's 2025, for God's sake, and we're just acknowledging to some extent this problem. The point I want to make to everybody is that this problem still occurs to this day. We're not seeing it as removal at birth, in the sense that we're removing these children because the parent has not got a partner. We're seeing it because the society and the state fails to deal with the issues that causes parents to struggle in terms of paying for rent, living in DV relationships, drug and alcohol abuse, and other issues, and mental health issues. So we have a plethora of events that are preventing us. So whereas back in these early days there was one singular issue, today there's a series of issues, but the problem is still the same, and that is children are being removed unnecessarily, and often in situations which are very similar to the situations that these women back in the 50s to 70s were experiencing as well. And I, as a social worker, am extremely embarrassed to acknowledge that my profession was the one that was responsible back then and is still the one responsible to this very day. And it wasn't until I spoke to Brooke today that I came to rethink, I guess, my involvement and the involvement of my profession, particularly some of the most terrible people I've ever worked with, who are social workers, who worked in this area, who should have done better, should have worked harder, but didn't because they're bloody lazy, basically. And so that, I guess that's my time. I just want people to reflect on all of that. I don't know what it means to you specifically, maybe nothing. And I noticed that Glenn has been on board. And Glenn, I hope this is relevant to you as well. So Glenn says, I'm an adopted person born in 1965. My birth mother dies in 1977. So I never saw what actually happened when I was born. And that is sad, Glenn, very sad. But I think there are hundreds of thousands of you out there as well who had the similar type of experiences. And so I wanted to, this doesn't segue into my next topic, but it is an issue which I think is quite relevant and I want to talk about as well. So these are so the first two things I'm going to be talking about today are social justice type issues. Now, often I get involved in discussing stuff around politics primarily, and I guess that's the reason why a lot of people join in this conversation. So for those people that wanted to have that conversation, you've got to wait till the end of this a little bit more before we talk about politics, and particularly American politics. But I needed to talk about these issues because these are prevalent issues, but kind of at the same time hidden, and therefore they still need to be discussed. And the next one is about domestic violence. Now, I've worked for many years around domestic violence, also ran courses, worked with thousands of men around this particular subject. And I think, to my great disappointment, and I've said this many times in previous videos, that I could probably count the number of men who actually dealt with this issue basically on one hand. That there's so few that have actually dealt with this issue directly. As hard as I might have worked to get those changes to eventuate, I don't think I was all that successful. Because some of the notions about who we are as men are so ingrained that nothing will shift them. So the particular subject, though, in this particular instance is, and the heading on the ABC News item was, statistically, it's impossible to predict domestic violence homicide. That doesn't mean we should give up. Now, every week, on average, 1 or 2 women are killed at the hands of their partners or ex-partners. We know also that it is more likely that the most dangerous time for a woman when she's leaving a relationship is when she's told her partner that she's leaving or when she has left. That is the most dangerous time, because that is the time he will get extremely upset and choose to take action against her and the children. So familicide is something that does happen too often as well, and we don't talk about that enough, where the guy chooses to take out not only just the wife, but the children, because if he can't have them, neither can she, and therefore he kills them as well. And the question they're asking here is that when it comes to domestic violence homicide, is the question really that they're asking is there anything we can do if we see it happening, if we see that there's a probability here that there is, or if there are some red flags, or if there's some signs that that this is potentially going to happen? Is there something we can do to prevent it? So the question they're asking is this: should we have seen it coming? When a woman is killed by her partner in Australia, domestic violence experts quickly line up to call out the red flags that had apparently been overlooked. The perpetrator had access to guns. The victim had previously reported being strangled by him. He'd made specific, detailed threats to kill her. Now, my argument around all of that is that those levels of threats and assaults are enough to tighten the legislation that prevents these men from not... So it's not enough to lock them up, because when one locks them up, they find ways to escape, they find ways to get out of that, they don't care anyway about bail restrictions, and they go and they stalk the women and they attack them regardless. So my solution is that I believe that these men should be declared as extremely dangerous and should be locked up for a long, long time. Now, I know that might seem harsh, but there again, if you're going to be there again, my guess is that that in itself would potentially save lives. Had police or bail magistrates or even family violence workers been paying more attention to these well-known risk factors, the argument goes, had they taken the victim's concerns seriously and stepped in, her death could have been prevented. And I think there's an element of truth in that. Except you can't always tell. You can't always tell which guy's giving the idle threat, the threat out of anger, or whether he will actually carry through with the threat anyway. The idea that domestic homicide is predictable is so entrenched that a reporter's recent well-intended claim that statistically the most reliable way to predict a domestic violence homicide is to believe the victim barely raised an eyebrow. But I think that is part of the problem. That if we're aware and we listen to the victim, because one of the problems we also have is that women haven't been understood for so long. The stories that women tell about being harassed, abused, physically assaulted, just have not been, the stories have not been believed. It's as simple as that. And time has arrived whereby we need to start believing. It's just like saying we don't believe that when children tell us that they've been assaulted, sexually assaulted or physically assaulted by a father or a friend of a family or whatever, that we don't believe them because they're children. And the same thing applies to women. We don't believe women. Why? Because they're women, and women are going to distort these events. And this is the right wing of the fathers' rights movement that sort of suggests that women cannot be believed because those particular movements are just so friggin' homogenous. Misogynist. Victims must always be believed. The uncomfortable truth, however, is that statistically it is almost impossible to predict lethal family violence because it is so rare. But it happens. It's not that rare. When you're looking at 1 to 2 women a week dying as a result of violence, I don't know whether that's rare. If you look at it rare in terms of the general population, I guess it is in terms of the number of women in the population. But nevertheless, it happens. At least that is the conclusion of a new study by researchers from Swinburne University Centre for Forensic Behavioural Science, which examined whether 12 factors commonly believed to be high-risk indicators of domestic homicide could accurately predict lethal or near-lethal family violence. It's very difficult to predict what we call low base rate events, or even that are very, very infrequent, said Benjamin Spivak, senior lecturer in the forensic psychology at Swinburne University and one of the study's authors. But what we keep seeing throughout the literature is a lot of claims that we can predict it, that we can zero in on homicide and target interventions in a precise way. It sounds sensible in theory, Spivak said, but often those interventions are quite intensive or intrusive. For instance, laws that make it harder for alleged domestic violence offenders deemed high risk to get bail. Great idea. If you're trying to avoid something horrific like a homicide, you may want to take extreme steps like that to stop it. But if you're not taking into account the fact that the overwhelming majority of people who you're targeting will never go on to have that kind of outcome, is that justifiable? In my view, yes, it is. It is justifiable, because if it saves lives, it has value. Now, it might mean that many men are put away for a long period of time, but then maybe the message should be that you should have acted badly in the first place. Maybe this is about re-educating young men in particular about how they should conduct themselves in relationships. Maybe this is also about ensuring that we talk to men about their emotions and how they're feeling about the events that are happening around them and how they feel particularly about the relationship that they're entering. There are many things that could be done in order to make people more aware, particularly young men, about how their behaviours may impact others. So some might argue that remanding thousands of people is justifiable if it saves even one life, as I do, but locking people up is costly, not just to taxpayers, but individuals and families. It disrupts employment, housing and social connections and can have serious mental health consequences, potentially exacerbating family violence. Well, I would suggest that there be certain facilities and certain programs that allow people, men, to be confronted by the issues and some appropriate professionals put in place who can actually work with those individuals to ensure that they do not cause any further harm. And any indication of any further harm being caused by those people means longer incarceration. So there is stuff that we can do, training, teaching young people about how to better relationships, and a whole host of other things can be things that we could do. So let me know what you think about these issues around forced removals, about the system as it exists today in terms of young people and how that impacts them. And so there's a whole stack of people on having conversation on my YouTube channel as well. Sorry, my Facebook channel. So thanks for that, everybody. I really do appreciate it. Thanks, Charisma, for your conversation also. Okay, so any topics that people want to talk about, please let me know. Thanks, James, for your $5. I appreciate that as well. So Sky News, that will be good. Tony will sack everyone. I don't know whether I would sack everybody from Sky News, but I would certainly sack 90% of them, and it's hard to figure out which ones I would actually keep. So there are a whole host of issues happening in Australia at the moment. One of them is Susan Lee's. I haven't got anything to put up on the screen in relation to this one just yet, but it certainly is with regard to Susan Lee's endeavours to put forward a policy, I guess, in relation to the economy and energy in particular, and to sort of focus a little bit more on affordability. It is interesting when we see Susan's proposals that they offer very little in terms of substance. So what is it that Lee plans to do that's going to make a significant difference in terms of the rollout of energy in Australia is unknown. I think that her primary plan is to improve gas supplies. Fair enough, not going to object to that. And also to ensure that perhaps more coal-powered stations are built, which takes years and which is unlikely to make a difference anyway. And I'll tell you one thing I'm really tired of, and that's the argument that's continually put forward that for whatever reason, it is we as a country only produce 1% to 2% of the world emissions. And I think, there's something about being a trendsetter, that Australia could be a significant trendsetter. We are the first country on this planet to do, and I could talk about this one as well, because this is an issue my wife and I have together, about the social media ban. And I'd like to know what you think about the social media ban. We could have a conversation around that as well. But I believe that, firstly, it's great as a country to do to have an initiative, to do something that's different, to do something that no one else is different, to make some sort of social change that perhaps hasn't been attempted anywhere else. And, with regard to what we're doing in relation to renewables in Australia is significant, given the type of country that we are, the access to sunlight, the access to wind, the access to hydroelectricity, and the access to gas. So we're in a really good position to use renewables as best as we can. Massive pieces of land, massive land we can outlay or lay out solar panels and all the other things that we can do. This is fantastic. We're doing a great job. Let's keep going. Susan Lee doesn't want to necessarily stop all of that. She wants to find a way to magically reduce the cost of energy. Now, when, it's like, I guess it's a bit like when you build a house, you're going to have to pay for the foundations and the walls to be put up and the roof and for powers to be put in to install power cables, the infrastructure that goes with the house. You're going to have to pay up front for all of that. That's just life. When it comes to renewables, it's the same idea. You're going to have to pay for all the infrastructure. And the infrastructure we've had up until this time was about an old style form of energy grid. And that has to be pulled down, has to be changed. So, as that process takes place, someone's got to pay for it. Unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, you and I are the ones that have to pay for all of that at this particular time. And it is unhelpful and it makes things expensive. And on top of that, young people are trying to buy homes and they can't afford that because of all because housing prices have escalated, because we've had this problem that's been ignored for so many years. And the interesting thing is this is not just an Australia problem. This is a worldwide problem. This is a problem that's come about because we just haven't got access to whatever it is we need to be able to build the houses in the first place and the people to be able to build them, which leads us to immigration. Do we have enough immigration? And should we have, who should we have coming into our country and all this sort of stuff? And then we've got, people like Pauline Hanson suggesting that perhaps we shouldn't have anybody coming into Australia if they have a different coloured skin to her own. Thank God she's not asking us or demanding that they should only come to Australia if they've got red hair. So we've got all of these issues happening here in Australia. And I think, as realistic as they are, and they are realistic, we need to be patient. I'm not suggesting for a moment that the Labor Party have it right, because they probably don't. But I do believe that they're doing the best they can under the circumstances that are presented to them in order to correct the situation. And we have an opposition in terms of the Liberal Party, the Nationals, and One Nation, who are pushing back against everything that they're doing without offering any substantive solution to any of the problems. One Nation would abolish any renewables whatsoever. They would go back to the Dark Ages, is where they would like us to go. Coal, let's pollute the atmosphere as best as we can. They're arguing stuff which is nonsensical because it is unlikely and it's not going to happen because the commitment has already been made to renewables. And at least the Liberal Party accept that notion. And I think that's important to acknowledge that they do. And how it is to look, who heaven only knows. Well, will the Liberal Party be able to, and this is a question I put to you folks, do you think the Liberal Party will ever be able to advocate appropriately for a system that is going to save money and which will convince you and I that it will work, given they were in power for 9 years previously and did bugger all? Can we believe them? No, we can't. And will they be able to prove themselves? No, they won't. Will they get elected in the next election? No, they won't, but they might do election after that, depending on how badly Albanese does. So let us know what you think about all of that. And stand by for my take on Pauline Hanson's speech on Sunday, which I'll be doing after I've finished this particular post with you. So I haven't checked because I'm on my own. So normally when I've got Avery on a Thursday, he can talk and I can check some of the things that you're saying. And thanks for all those people that have come on board. It's great to see you. back to whale. Or Tony J says, yeah, fair enough. So wrangles to migrate. All right. So I'm just trying to read some of the. Oh yeah. So Glenn says the NLP have net zero policies. So true. And I see some stuff still coming through on my Facebook page, which is rather pleasing. So I wanted to just remind you, if you wouldn't mind, to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. I really do appreciate it. It helps me to grow, and it helps the message to get out there. You know, there aren't all that many people of my vintage, I need to say, who are advocating for progressive ideas, different way of viewing the world, and not necessarily acceptable way of viewing the world, but certainly a different way. So I would like to, I would at least hope that there are people out there who could share my values. And even if you don't disagree with me, that's fine. I'm okay with that. And I've said many times before, if any of you would like to have a conversation with me about any particular topic, let me know in the comments section below when the video is finished, particularly because I'll pick that up. Let me know if you'd like to come online and have a conversation with me face to face. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Love to have that conversation with you, find out what you disagree with and why, and we could have a further conversation from that point on. Now, I wanted to finish with the White House. I've just been watching a press conference by Senator Kelly, who is the guy that Donald Trump had threatened to court-martial and then to execute, because he and a group of other senators and people who were service people said that, you know, if you don't break the law, because if you break the law, we're likely to find out about it anyway, but we particularly don't want you to break the law because laws are not to be broken, and that you have a responsibility not to. And because of all of that, a lot of shit's come to bear on Senator Kelly and the others, and lots of threats of violence. You know, it surprises me how here in Australia we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't tend to have the same degree of hostility towards our politicians as they do in the United States. Someone criticised me recently, one of my most critic people, well, the person that criticised me the most actually, he suggested that I hate Pauline Hanson. Well, I don't hate anybody, to be honest. Don't like their policies, think they could do better. Going to call them out whenever I can, but basically I don't hate anyone. But I do want to emphasise the fact that here in Australia we're less hostile, less likely to threaten. Can you imagine what would happen if Albanese threatened to execute Susan Lee because he simply disagreed with her? Can you just imagine what would happen? It's unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. It would not happen. So, and then there are these strikes, and this has all come about because of these strikes that are happening in Venezuelan motorboats that are, I guess they're saying, are drug boats. So, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorizes Admiral to conduct multiple strikes that killed 11 people on a vessel for Venezuela, allegedly carrying illegal narcotics in September. They don't know that for sure. The White House has confirmed, insisting the attack that has come under bipartisan scrutiny was lawless. White House Secretary KKK Levitt offered a justification for the September the 2nd strike after politicians from both parties on Sunday announced support for congressional reviews of US military strikes against vessels suspected of smuggling drugs in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean. So the issue here primarily is that on one of these, firstly, are the strikes legal? Number two, a boat was hit. People landed in the ocean. They did not die until such time as Hegseth insisted on killing everyone. That is against military law. It's against universal law. It's against military law. It's against human decency. But these people just are not decent. They are revolting and disgusting human beings. And then just want to finish with this one about Kash Patel, because he's my favourite person in the whole world. FBI under Kash Patel has become internally paralysed by fear, new report reveals. No surprise about this. The FBI director, Kash Patel, is in over his head and leading a chronically underperforming agency paralysed by fear and plummeting morale, according to a scathing 115-page report compiled by a National Alliance of Retired and Active Duty FBI Special Agents and analysts. The leaked assessment obtained by the New York Post and prepared for both Congressional, Senate and House Judicial Committees is based on confidential accounts from 24 FBI sources. So it's kind of not like this is about the FBI reporting on the FBI, I guess. They accuse Patel, and I want to relate this to Patel and Pete Hegseth, because both men are totally unqualified for their positions. And again, I relate this to Australia. What would happen if this was in Australia? They accuse Patel of lacking the experience to lead the FBI and that managers will not take initiative without explicit directions for fear of being fired. Patel's first 6 months have produced a troubling picture of an organisation described by insiders as a rudderless ship, with two sources independently characterising the director as being in over his head. One stated he lacks the requisite knowledge or deep understanding of all the FBI's unique and complex investigations and intelligence programs. One key accusation is that the FBI has become internally paralysed by fear. Managers are afraid of losing their jobs and waiting on directions from the FBI director rather than taking initiative, according to multiple sources. So, just want to come back to one simple fact. The United States is Fruit Looped. There's no disputing all of that. The country's a mess. We see it from afar, admittedly, but day by day we see what a destructive, ignorant clown Donald Trump is. We see it for what it is, and we need to acknowledge it. I just want to thank all of those people. Quite a few people came on board, and there's a few people on Facebook as well. So thanks everybody for being on board. And I'm doing a live feed again on Thursday. This one is just with me. Avery will be away. But I do ask you, as I do every section, if you're watching me on YouTube, please remember to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell for further notifications. In the meantime, take care everybody and make sure that you look after yourselves and the people that you love.